Beneath the surface of California's golden hills lies a place where blueprints whisper, doors shift without sound, and sorrow has shape. A house that never ends, because grief has no boundary. Welcome to Southern Sky Bedtime Stories, where the strange, the haunted, and the unexplainable come to life after dark. Tonight, we begin an epic descent into the chilling legend of the Winchester house, but not the version you've heard on ghost tours or late-night documentaries. This is a deeper truth. One that dares to ask, what if the house isn't haunted? What if the house is alive? Join us as we unravel a tale of grief-wrought architecture, psychic architects, and a mansion that may be less a place, and more a mind. You are now entering the labyrinth. If you enjoy haunting tales and impossible mysteries, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Southern Sky Bedtime Stories. Explore our playlist for more chilling narratives that will leave your nightlight burning. Now, settle in, turn down the lights, and listen carefully, because the house is listening too. Winchester House, the labyrinth of spirits, the house that never sleeps. The fog rolled in thick and low over San Jose, California, blanketing the city in a whisper of damp grey. From a distance, the Winchester Mystery House sat like a Gothic sentinel behind its wrought iron gates, 3 stories high, turrets piercing the clouds, windows where there shouldn't be windows, staircases that led to ceilings, and doors that opened into nothing. To the average passerby, it looked like a strange, oversized mansion, an eccentric relic of a bygone era. But to those who knew, really knew, it was a trap. Not for the living, but for the dead. It began, as many things do, with death. Sarah Winchester, heiress to the Winchester repeating arms fortune, arrived in California in the aftermath of grief. Her husband, William Wirt Winchester, had died of tuberculosis in 1881, just a few years after their infant daughter was claimed by a mysterious wasting disease. Devastated and alone, Sarah did what many wealthy widows of the time might have done. She consulted a medium. But what the medium told her that day in Boston would change the course of her life and the lives of countless others forever. "You are haunted," the spirit whisperer had said. "Every soul taken by a Winchester rifle lingers around you. They demand payment, blood, or absolution. You cannot escape them, but you can confuse them. Build. Never stop building. If you do, they will find you." Sarah believed. Oh, she believed. And so she bought a plot of land in the sun-soaked valley of Santa Clara. She hired workers, paid them triple, and gave one instruction: never stop building. No blueprints, no architect, just constant hammering, constant soaring. By day and by night, year after year, the house grew, illogical, chaotic, spiraling into madness. She built to mislead the dead. She built to survive. But what if the dead weren't so easily fooled? They say the walls of the Winchester house remember everything. In the Rosewood parlour, where Sarah once took tea with visitors, the wallpaper is darker in one corner. Some say from age, others from the blood that soaked it one foggy morning in 1904, when a worker vanished during renovations and was never seen again. His tools remained, perfectly arranged. A single fingerprint smeared across the brass of his hammer. No body, no signs of struggle, just a draft that never went away, and the faint sound of nails being driven into wood, from somewhere behind the wall. There's a stairwell in the east wing, 13 steps, all at different heights. If you climb them at midnight, you'll find yourself on the 2nd floor. But if you return before dawn, the stairs take you somewhere else entirely. The 3rd floor landing that shouldn't exist. The red corridor, room 46. The one with the locked door. Sarah always carried the key to room 46. She never let anyone else inside. She claimed it was a séance room, a private place, where she could commune with the spirits, receive guidance for her endless construction. But the workers told a different story. At dusk, they'd hear her speaking in 2 voices, one her own, tired and trembling. The other, deeper, guttural, like the thud of a coffin closing. It is said that Sarah never slept in the same room 2 nights in a row. She feared the spirits would find her if she did. But she never missed a single séance. Every night, at the stroke of midnight, she would disappear into room 46 and re-emerge before sunrise, pale, silent, eyes glazed with a knowledge too heavy for the waking world. One night, in the winter of 1906, something went wrong. The wind outside howled like wolves. The shutters banged against the stained glass windows. And from room 46, workers heard the sound of splintering wood and a scream, not Sarah's voice, but something colder, sharper. They rushed to the door, but it was locked, bolted from the inside, and then silence. When the door was finally broken down at sunrise, Sarah was sitting in the center of the room, her face waxy, her hands blackened with soot. Her eyes were open, her lips stitched shut with iron wire. The room smelled of burnt cedar and blood. On the wall behind her, scrawled in ash, were 4 words: "The building must continue." And so it did. Even after Sarah's death in 1922, construction on the house didn't stop immediately. Some workers stayed. They claimed they still heard her footsteps in the halls, heard her voice whispering blueprints in the dead of night. Some even claimed she visited them in dreams, instructing them on which hallway to seal next, which window to brick up, and the house, hungry as ever, accepted their offerings. Now, nearly 100 years later, the Winchester Mystery House is a tourist attraction, a curiosity for the curious, a playground for ghost hunters, a haven for skeptics and believers alike. But some say Sarah's work was never finished, that the spirits she tried so desperately to confuse are still wandering the halls, enraged and lost. That room 46 remains locked for a reason, and that the house still listens, still waits, still builds. The whispering blueprints. The rain returned to San Jose after years of drought, softening the soil and soaking the ivy that had slowly crept up the exterior walls of the Winchester house. It was late autumn, and the mansion seemed to inhale the moisture like a corpse thirsting for embalming fluid. Quietly, greedily. Tour groups had dwindled with the season's turn, and for the first time in months, the house stood still. Or so it seemed. But under the slick shingles and behind sealed walls, something stirred. Talia Monroe was a grad student in architectural history from UC Berkeley. Her thesis focused on American eccentric constructions and obsessive design behaviors. She'd arrived at the Winchester house to document the floor plans, working with a team granted rare access to sealed parts of the house for a limited restoration grant. What she didn't know, what no one told her, was that they had opened room 46 again. Not to the public, only to her. "Just document the measurements," said the curator, a terse woman named Ms. Lark. "No sketches, no recordings. Don't stay longer than 30 minutes. And don't shut the door," muttered the maintenance man who led her there. "If it closes, we don't reopen it. Not until sunrise." Talia had smiled politely at their warnings. She was a woman of reason, and superstition bored her. Besides, her research was far more fascinating than any ghost story. She was more interested in the structure's anomalies, the logic-defying turns, the M.C. Escher-like verticalities, the idea that grief could be mapped in architecture. But once she crossed the threshold of room 46, her heart began to change its rhythm. It was a square room with no windows. Dust lay thick on the wooden floor, though the center had been curiously swept clear, as if something had sat there, a table perhaps, or a circle. Faint markings traced the edges, symbols she couldn't place. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, revealing dark wood beneath that was oddly warm to the touch. The air was dry, yet her skin prickled with the sensation of breath on her neck. Talia crouched, and began to measure the distance between the walls. As she extended the tape measure toward the far corner, something shifted beneath her hand. The wood groaned, not like a floorboard under weight, but like something reluctant, annoyed even. She looked up. On the far wall, a panel had opened. Not a door, a slit. No hinges, no handle, just a vertical slice of darkness, breathing cold into the room. Her flashlight flickered, then died. A hum began, low and slow, like voices heard through thick walls. She told herself it was the wind, but then came the sound of chalk, scraping, furious chalk, on the wall behind her. She turned. Nothing. But the markings on the wall had changed. Instead of the circular pattern she had noticed earlier, a new shape had appeared, etched freshly into the soot-black surface. A blueprint. At first glance it resembled a maze, but it wasn't. It was a layout, a floor plan. Her breath hitched. It showed a hallway that didn't exist. At least, not on the current floor plan of the house. But as she studied the design, she realized it could. If the walls behind the east turret were hollow, and if there was an additional space between the second and third floors, a crawl space maybe, then it was possible. The dimensions aligned with nothing modern, nothing practical. It was as if the design had folded in on itself, and in the very center of the drawn hallway was a word, scribbled in thick ash: welcome. That night, Talia returned to the hotel room she'd rented across the street. She couldn't sleep. Not from fear, she told herself, but from fascination. She laid out every sketch she had ever done of the house. Dozens of angles, hundreds of structural inconsistencies. She aligned the new layout with the oldest blueprints she'd found in the city records, ones rumoured to be based on Sarah Winchester's own hand-drawn drafts. They matched. More than matched. They overlaid seamlessly like two halves of a code. At exactly midnight, her lamp flickered and died. The room went cold. Not the usual chill of broken HVAC or thin walls. This cold was directed. A purposeful cold, pressing on her sternum like fingers. The blueprint on her desk began to move. The lines thickened. New symbols bled out from the corners, sigils that had not been there before. Her hands moved without conscious thought, tracing them as if compelled. At the bottom of the page, her pen scrawled something she did not understand until it was done. Build me. She dropped the pen. The paper pulsed once, like something breathing beneath it. Then silence. But she knew what had just happened. Sarah had returned. Or at least, something had. And it wasn't done with the house. Talia began to dream. In her sleep, she walked hallways that should not exist. Narrow, suffocating corridors with red wallpaper that bled from the seams. Mirrors that did not reflect. Stairs that sloped downward into candlelit spaces filled with voices, some pleading, others laughing. Always the same phrase echoed. Keep building, child. We are not finished. She awoke with blood on her fingertips. Under her nails, splinters of cedar. Back at the mansion, Miss Lark waited by the gate the next morning. She didn't speak a word as Talia approached. She only held out a sealed envelope. No return address, no explanation. Just a name written in faded black ink, Sarah L. Winchester. Inside was a single page, yellow with age. On it, a blueprint, not a room, not a hallway, a door. The design was elaborate, inlaid with symbols and spirals. It required precise materials, obsidian hinges, a lock made from melted rifle barrels, a doorknob of rose quartz. At the bottom, in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting, for those who seek, beware. This door leads to the true house. And beneath that, a final warning. Once opened, it cannot be shut. Talia's thesis was abandoned. She stopped attending class. She stopped returning calls. She moved into a small house a few blocks from the Winchester Mansion and started ordering materials. Rare woods, Antique glass, old Winchester rifle fragments from online collectors. She emptied her savings, sold her car. Her hands worked day and night. And slowly, the door took shape. But the spirits, they were growing restless. The house had waited long enough. The door to the true house. Talia did not sleep the night before she installed the door. It stood now in her rented garage, towering, heavy with age, before it had even been used. The design had matched Sarah Winchester's blueprint perfectly. Ornate carvings that spiraled inward like a vortex, veins of dark rosewood twisting around a heart of polished obsidian. The doorknob, cold to the touch, hummed softly under her hand, pulsing like it had a heartbeat of its own. The lock, a melted mass of forged rifle barrels, had taken 3 days to craft. She'd followed the instructions precisely. Fuse the metal under flame, lit with sulfur and sage, hammer it into shape during the witching hour, and cool it with grave water. She had no idea what grave water truly was, but when she sprinkled the iron with rain collected from the Winchester house's rooftop, the steel hissed and hardened. Now, it was ready. But the question that plagued her mind wasn't about how to open it. It was, where would it lead? The installation took less than an hour. She'd chosen the wall behind the makeshift library in her home, where the old wood paneling had always felt thinner, less real. As she cut the outline, her fingers trembled with anticipation and fear. Behind the drywall was hollow space, an unnatural emptiness, no insulation, no framework, just a void. A cold draft blew out of it, carrying the faint scent of lavender and rot. She fitted the door into place, sealed the frame, and stepped back. It looked like it had always belonged there. Talia waited until midnight. Then she turned the key. Click. The sound echoed unnaturally, deeper, longer, as if it had travelled down a stairwell carved into the earth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the doorknob turned on its own, slowly, deliberately. The door opened an inch, then 2, and beyond it, blackness. Not the absence of light, not shadow, but something deeper, a consuming dark, liquid and thick, the kind of dark that swallowed memory. Talia took 1 step forward. The air shifted. Warm breath kissed her ear. "Welcome back, Sarah." She froze. The voice was not hers. It was not real. And yet, it echoed inside her mind like a long-lost echo, familiar, maternal, insistent. Then the darkness pulsed. A hallway formed. She stepped through. Behind her, the door did not close. But the room she had come from, the garage, the books, the light, it faded, as if the house had taken a breath, and with that breath, swallowed her world. The hallway stretched ahead, impossibly long and narrow. Gas lamps flickered to life along the walls, but cast no shadows. Their flames were blue, dancing like they were underwater. The wallpaper here was red velvet, scorched in places. The floor creaked beneath her, yet the sound echoed as if she walked over a chasm. Talia touched the wall. It was warm. Beneath the wallpaper, something pulsed. Slowly, like veins. She walked. The first room she found was a nursery, old, untouched. A wooden rocking horse tilted forward and back, though the air was still. A music box played a distant tune, off-key, slow, the melody winding like a spider's thread. A cradle sat in the centre. Talia approached it with dread anchoring her spine. Inside, there was no baby, just a mirror, cracked down the centre, and from the mirror, her reflection smiled. But she was not smiling. The mirror whispered, "You built the door, now build the house." She ran, through the hallway, through doors that shouldn't have been there. Some opened to brick walls, others to staircases suspended in nothing, winding upward into darkness or downward into cold. The architecture changed with her movement, as if the house was watching her, reacting to her, growing with her fear. She turned a corner and stopped. A man stood at the end of the hall, dressed in black, Victorian suit. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow. In his hand, he held something wrapped in canvas, long, thin. A rifle. She stepped back. He spoke without lips. Each room is a grave, each nail a memory. You were chosen. You are her hand. The canvas unrolled. It was not a rifle. It was blueprints. The next section of the true house. Talia awoke in her bed. Sunlight poured in through the window. Her door was gone, replaced with flat, untouched wall. No sign of installation, no tools, no splinters, nothing. She thought she had dreamed it all. Until she looked at her hand. There were ashes beneath her fingernails. Blueprints sat on her desk. New ones, drawn in her handwriting. 3 days later, she was back at the Winchester house. She requested access to a sealed chamber in the West Wing, a room untouched since 1915, marked on no public tour, sealed behind a false fireplace. To her surprise, Ms. Lark agreed without question. They always return to where it started, the curator said, voice flat. The house allows it when it's ready. Inside the sealed room, Talia's breath caught. The dimensions matched the blueprints she'd dreamed. Every detail, every corner, even the red wallpaper, curling like burnt flesh. In the center of the room stood a pedestal. Upon it, another door, not built, grown, a living door, with a lock made from human bone. The inscription above read, "One door opens the path, another, the architect." And the whisper returned, "You are the house now." That night, the construction began, not with hammer and nails, but with thought, with need. Talia didn't sleep, she didn't eat. Her hands moved with unnatural precision, sketching room after room, each one stranger than the last. An aviary of screaming birds, a ballroom with no floor, a library where the books screamed when touched, and the house, it responded. Behind the Winchester Mansion, a new wing began to grow. Overnight. No workers, no permits, just rooms appearing, doors shifting, windows breathing. By the end of the week, 4 tourists had vanished inside. Security footage showed them walk into the East Wing and never come out. Talia watched the footage over and over and smiled, not with cruelty, not with joy, but with understanding. Sarah had never wanted to trap the spirits. She had wanted to build them a kingdom. Now, Talia would finish what she started. The rooms that should not be rain clawed against the windows of the Winchester house like fingernails. The valley was shrouded in thick mist, and even the tourists that wandered its grounds during daylight were quieter now, speaking in hushed tones, casting glances over their shoulders when the wind whistled through the eaves. There was a tension in the walls, a vibration in the floorboards. The house was waking up, and in its heart, Talia Monroe was no longer a visitor. She had moved into the mansion 3 days prior under the guise of private restoration research. Ms. Lark didn't argue. In fact, the curator had provided her a room, one of the sealed ones, deep within the southern wing. It had once been a pantry, then later a linen closet, but now it had become something else entirely. At night, the walls bled blue light, and the door to her room changed every time she shut it. Talia kept drawing. Her hands no longer ached. They flowed, like vessels. The blueprints emerged in the same thick charcoal lines, impossible non-Euclidean angles, stairs that bent like ribs, rooms shaped like lungs, a chapel without pews, but an altar made of mirrors that reflected other people's faces, a dining hall where the chandelier screamed when lit. These were not visions. These were instructions. And each morning, as she awoke, she found new parts of the house were now real. It started with the Hall of Glass. No one built it. No construction crew was called. It simply appeared, behind a once false door near the tower stairwell. Tour guides assumed it had always been there, some forgotten restoration. But those who entered reported strange things, reflections that lingered too long. One woman claimed her reflection smiled at her even after she turned away. The hall of glass was followed by the silence nursery, 3 cribs, toys that floated 2 inches off the floor. Visitors who stepped inside could not hear their own footsteps, could not speak, could not scream. One child went missing for 3 hours before being found standing perfectly still in the center, clutching a doll that no one had seen before. Its porcelain face had Talia's eyes. The child's parents never returned to the mansion. Talia documented none of it. She only drew. The blueprints came faster now, more intricate. They showed not only rooms, but rituals. One required candles made from human tallow, placed in exact locations along a pentagram-shaped corridor. Another demanded a pool of mercury be poured beneath the foundation of a newly constructed staircase that led nowhere. She complied. Ms. Lark provided the materials. No questions asked. She too had begun to dream. Every night the house sent her further, down into the true house, the one beneath the foundation of the known world. In her dreams, Talia walked barefoot across tiled floors slick with blood, though her feet never stained. She passed windows that opened into clouds of bone dust. Once, she passed a room where hundreds of disembodied hands clapped slowly as she entered, welcoming her with blind devotion. At the center of it all stood a throne of keys, carved from every door that had ever been sealed. Above it, a mural of Sarah Winchester, with her eyes stitched shut and her arms outstretched, fingers pointing toward the corners of the room. Each one marked with a name, names Talia recognized. When she woke the next morning, those same names were carved into her bedroom wall. Franklin Graves, a carpenter who disappeared in 1904. Margaret Lee, a guest speaker who suffered a stroke while lecturing on spiritualism in 1986. Emilio Vargas, a security guard who'd gone missing last month. Talia Monroe, carved last. Beneath it, a new line forming, still unfinished. Her hand shook for the first time in weeks, not out of fear, but awe. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it was remembering. Word began to spread. TikToks, YouTube videos, paranormal influencers and amateur ghost hunters flooded the site. The mansion became viral again, dubbed America's real eldritch location. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the new rooms, though no one could agree on where they were, or if they were the same from day to day. One video captured a hallway that looped, literally looped. The girl filming walked through 5 doors before re-entering the same room from the opposite side, her face growing more panicked with each pass. The video ends with her camera falling to the floor. Her body was found in the west attic 2 days later. Her mouth was filled with feathers. Another video showed a man knocking on a mirrored door, only for the reflection to knock back out of sync. They called it a hoax, but views poured in. So did bodies. Miss Lark began hosting night walks, exclusive midnight tours for influencers, celebrities, and the ultra-wealthy. NDA required. No filming, no phones. What she didn't tell them was that none of the routes were planned. The house chose who could enter where, and sometimes it did not choose to let them leave. Talia watched each group from her mirror. She no longer needed cameras. The house showed her everything. One evening, she drew a new room, the Theatre of Whispers, a performance hall with no stage, just rows and rows of seats facing a single curtain. Behind the curtain, something that sang in a language no one knew, yet everyone wept when they heard it. The very next day, the room manifested beneath the courtyard. 37 chairs, 1 curtain, only 17 people came out. The rest? No one searched for them, because the theatre doesn't echo when someone screams. It drowns it with music. Talia's skin was beginning to change. Not visibly, not yet, but she no longer needed light to see in the dark. Her heartbeat adjusted to match the walls, beating slower when the house slept, faster when it wanted more. She stopped, speaking aloud. Why use words when the house understood thought? On the 7th night since the door was built, she returned in dream to the throne of keys. But this time, it was not empty. A woman stood beside it, short, stern, dressed in black lace with her hair pinned in a bun. Sarah Winchester. Her lips did not move, but her voice was everywhere. I built to delay. You build to invite. You've made the house honest. Talia bowed. Sarah's hand reached toward her, and from her fingers fell a new key, made of bone and sorrow. Talia caught it, and the throne accepted her as its new architect. That morning, she sealed her room with a wall of red brick. No door, no window, no exit. The new wing would be born beneath it. 5 days later, the house shifted. Foundations trembled, wooden beams groaned. A staircase that had never existed appeared in the front hall, leading down, not up, down into the true house. And above the entrance, carved freshly in the wood, Talia Monroe, architect in residence. The house beneath there had always been whispers about a lower level, subterranean floors beneath the foundation of the Winchester house. Not just cellars or wine storage, but true levels, whole wings hidden beneath the gardens and the cobbled courtyards, entombed beneath dirt and time. Local legends called it the Hollow Root. Older documents spoke of it cryptically, rooms with no architectural records, built during periods where no workers were on payroll. Even Sarah herself never publicly admitted to any underground expansion. But her journals, those recovered from the walls in 1923, contained strange lines written in mirrored shorthand. The lower house grows when the upper house slumbers. Their floors are not aligned, but entwined. What is buried is not gone. It waits. Now, that wait was over. The staircase appeared overnight, right in the grand front hall where no staircase had ever been. Built of darkened walnut, carved with symbols that defied translation. No nails, no visible joinery. The banister pulsed faintly under touch, like something breathing just beneath the surface. Talia watched it from the second floor, her new vantage point. She hadn't eaten in days, hadn't blinked in hours. She no longer needed to. Her eyes had adjusted to this place, not just to the dark, but to dimensions not built for humans. Angles that sang, corners that hissed, light that folded around her when she walked through narrow places. The house had made her a vessel, but she was far from empty. The public never saw the staircase. They couldn't. To them, the grand hall looked unchanged. Unchipped marble floors, elegant crown mouldings, velvet ropes, and polished signs explaining Sarah's eccentricities. But for those touched by the true house, for those who'd seen the mirrored door or heard the whispering vents, it was impossible to ignore. The influencers called it the staircase of the split sight. Those who stepped on it saw different things depending on who they were. A skeptic saw endless darkness. A grieving mother saw the son she lost waiting at the bottom. A blind man saw for the first time visions in colour and flame. None of them returned, not because they were dead, but because they found something else, something better or worse. Talia descended alone on the 7th night, not because she had to, but because it was time. The wood didn't creak beneath her. The air grew thick with dust that never settled, floating, rotating, pulsing with memory. Her breath crystallized, not from cold, but from density. Down here, the air was filled with thought. There were no lights, and yet she could see everything. The first room was a library, thousands of books. None had titles, all bound in shades of skin and velvet. She reached for one, an instinct more than a decision, and opened it. The pages were blank. Then not. Words bled through, not ink, but something living. The text twisted as she read it, familiar, then foreign, then suddenly hers. On the 5th of October, you dreamt of a spiral room with no ceiling. That was not a dream. You entered us. We entered you. Continue. She dropped the book. It closed itself. From the far end of the library, a door opened, though no hand touched it. The next room was the bell hall. Silent bells hung from the ceiling, each with a different crack down its body. Beneath them, wooden chairs. 12, arranged in a circle. One bell for each chair. A child sat in the 7th, skin pale, face blank, its mouth opened, and though no sound came out, the bells rang. Soft, hollow, melancholic. The tone vibrated down Talia's bones. She closed her eyes and saw blueprints, new ones, rooms that weren't rooms but feelings, a gallery of grief, a stairwell of guilt, a chamber of memories where time rewound itself endlessly, forcing its occupant to relive their worst moment until they spoke the correct name. When she opened her eyes again, the child was gone, but the chair was still rocking. She wandered deeper. Time lost meaning. She encountered rooms that blinked, vanishing if she looked at them too directly. Doorways that turned to paintings, paintings that whispered, floors made of water that felt like glass, mirrors that reflected moments that hadn't happened yet. Every blueprint she had drawn now existed, and beyond them, new rooms she had never imagined. The house had begun to dream for itself. She passed a hallway where each door had a name carved in brass, names of visitors, names of the vanished, names not yet known. One door said, "You." She did not open it. Not yet. Then came the heart room. It was not a room, but a chamber carved into the stone of the earth itself. No beams, no walls, just stone, veined with iron and gold and pulsing like a living organ. In its center, a cocoon, 7 feet tall, suspended in air by unseen threads. It glowed faintly, pale green and dull crimson. From within, something moved, a silhouette, feminine, still forming, still changing, and etched around the cocoon in looping burnt script. "The house will have its body." Talia fell to her knees, her mind unspooled. She understood now. Sarah had delayed it for decades, centuries even, but it had always been inevitable. The house was not a prison. It was a womb, an incubator for something older than grief, older than guilt, something born from death but not bound to it. And Talia, she had been the midwife, the drawings, the blueprints, the rituals. Each had brought the house closer to its final shape. Each room was a cell, each door a vertebra. And now the heart was forming. Above her, the staircase she descended was gone. In its place, stone. But she did not panic. She had no reason to. She was where she belonged. The house had chosen her. The cocoon pulsed faster now. The figure within pressed its hand against the membrane, slim, fingers, long nails, face still hidden in shadow. But Talia recognized something deep and ancient in its shape. Power, not evil, not good, just hunger, and it would soon wake. The quickening. Beneath the roots of the earth, beneath the foundations of brick and spirit and blood, the cocoon pulsed. With each beat, the air shimmered. Dust rose in slow-motion spirals. The walls, if they could still be called walls, throbbed with something deeper than life, something pre-life, pre-form, as if the very concept of architecture had been peeled back, reduced to base intent. This was not the Winchester house. This was the thing it had always wanted to become. And Talia Monroe, kneeling before the embryonic shape in the heart room, felt the quickening in her bones. The process had begun. Hours passed, or days. Time fractured this deep. Sometimes it moved like syrup, other times like lightning. Talia sat in silence, not out of reverence, but because she was listening, not with ears, but with skin, with marrow, with that extra sense that had awakened within her since she'd first opened the true door. And the thing within the cocoon was speaking to her, not in language, in geometry. The visions came sharp and uninvited. Blueprints burned into her mind, too fast to process. Rooms of impossible dimensions, spirals within spirals, vaults without ceilings, loops that formed paradoxes. One hallway was shown from 3 angles at once, all conflicting, all correct. And at the center of every drawing, the cocooned one. Sometimes it appeared as a woman with hollow eyes and stitched lips. Sometimes as a mass of limbs crawling from a clockwork womb. Sometimes it had Talia's face. And always, beneath the images, one phrase burned in white-hot script. She must be born. She stood. Her body responded before her mind had made the decision. She approached the cocoon. It hovered before her now, suspended in strands of spider-thin silver thread, humming with potential. She raised her hand to touch it, and stopped. The thread snapped taut like a whip. Pain bloomed across her palm as if she'd been burned by a branding iron. But it wasn't heat that punished her. It was disobedience. The time wasn't right. Yet. Back on the surface, the house was changing. Violently. Tour guides were the first to notice. Staircases now turned corners that didn't exist the day before. A hallway that used to lead to the rose garden now spiraled downward into a corridor of mirrors. The mirrors reflected different versions of the person walking past. Older, dead, reversed, laughing when they weren't. A woman was found sobbing in the séance room, repeating the same phrase over and over. The eyes on the ceiling are watching me sleep. When security entered, there were no eyes. But after she was escorted out, the tour staff looked up and found 13 of them carved into the plaster, perfectly circular, blinking in unison. That night, 3 more doors appeared on the east wing. No locks, no hinges. Only warnings, handwritten in chalk. Do not open unless invited. This room is not for you. She dreams still. Do not wake her early. By morning, the doors were gone, but someone had opened one. They found the security guard's radio in the hallway, still hissing static, occasionally whispering, "Talia, Talia, open the way." Meanwhile, deep below, Talia wandered the hall of gestures. It had not been there before. She hadn't drawn it. The house had birthed it on its own. It was a long corridor lined with statues, dozens of them, each carved in exquisite detail. Human figures in mid-motion, but their gestures were grotesque, unnatural. Arms bent the wrong way, necks stretched too far, fingers fanned out like spider legs, eyes closed, mouths wide. As she passed them, they shifted, not physically, but in meaning. Each statue began to resemble someone she knew, people from her life before the house, her mentor at Berkeley, a childhood friend, her mother, and at the very end of the hall, a statue of herself, mouth open in silent scream, eyes missing. She reached out to touch it, and it bled. The cocoon reacted. Far above in the heart room, the threads vibrated, the air cracked, the walls grew another inch closer together. The house was breathing faster now, its heartbeat accelerating. The quickening was no longer a slow process. It had become urgent. Talia returned to the cocoon. It was no longer still. The silhouette within was moving, coiling, stretching, trying, and something was forming at its feet, a nest made of keys, nails, and shards of broken window panes. It pulsed faintly, glowing with the blue-green hue of ghost light. One by one, objects emerged from it, suspended in mid-air. A child's shoe, perfectly clean. A wedding ring, burned black. A name tag, Ms. Lark. Talia stared at the final object. She had not seen the curator in days. But the house had. The house always watched, always remembered. There was a sound, low and wet, like flesh splitting. The cocoon was cracking. Upstairs, visitors screamed. Rooms rearranged mid-tour. One man fell through a hallway that had been solid seconds before, vanishing into a shaft full of teeth. Another claimed the piano in the music room had played itself backward, and when he tried to record it, his phone melted in his hand. Staff fled the mansion. Tourists broke down the doors, but the house sealed itself. Windows vanished. Walls thickened. The Winchester house had entered labour. And Talia, she was no longer drawing. She was no longer dreaming. She was waiting, hands clasped, eyes shut, listening to the rhythm of a new world preparing to be born. In her mind, Sarah Winchester's voice echoed, gentle, proud. You finished what I was too afraid to begin. You freed her, and she will free you. The cocoon burst, and she stepped out, the birth of the architect. She emerged from the cocoon not like a newborn, but like a queen returning from a long voyage. No screaming, no blood, no fanfare. The walls of the heart room did not shake, nor did the earth groan. Instead, everything stopped, even breath, even thought, for the span of a heartbeat as the cocoon's shell peeled away in slow, fractal spirals. She hovered, suspended 3 feet above the stone floor. Naked, but not vulnerable. Her skin was the colour of candle wax and stormlight, fluid, shifting, as if she was still choosing which face to wear. Her hair coiled and unwound like smoke, never fully taking shape. Her eyes were mirrors, and in them, Talia saw every version of herself, each standing at a different door in a different time. The thing that had been born was not just a being, it was the embodiment of the house's will, and it had chosen a form close to human, close to Talia. But not Talia, not anymore. She spoke, and her voice was not sound, but sensation, a pressure in the mind, a hand on the soul, a weight behind the eyes. We are the room before the first room, the foundation beneath the foundation. Talia knelt without command, not out of fear, but out of recognition. She had not merely summoned this creature, she had gestated it, and now she was no longer the architect, she was the first disciple. The being stepped forward. Where her bare feet touched stone, tile grew, ornate mosaic spirals embedded with whispers. They moved beneath the surface like fish swimming beneath glass. The heart room changed shape behind her, becoming longer, deeper, the ceiling rising into a vault of stars that hadn't existed minutes before. She raised her hand, and the entire house responded. Above, in the upper floors, the walls wept. Paintings cried blood. Mirrors shattered and reformed into new windows, peering not into rooms, but into other versions of the Winchester house, each existing on a slightly different frequency. The house had become a nexus, a bridge between iterations of itself. Tourists still trapped inside now wandered through impossible geometry. One found herself walking on the ceiling of a room she hadn't entered. Another emerged into what looked like the same house, but filled with salt statues of people mid-scream. A third opened a door and found a cathedral made entirely of bones, where a chorus sang a hymn in reversed Latin. They weren't just lost, they were being reorganized, classified, like organs in a body being relocated to more efficient places. And Ms. Lark, she stood in the grand parlour, holding a lantern, surrounded by 8 doors that hadn't existed an hour ago. She was crying, not from sadness, but from relief. I kept her safe, she whispered, voice cracked. All these years, I held the blueprint in my dreams. I fed her with memory. I burned the names. I lit the candles. I never let her starve. She opened her mouth, and the mirrors in the room shattered inward, not exploding, but folding, swallowing her whole. One shard remained, It reflected nothing at all. Below, in the depths, the architect spoke again. Her hand hovered over Talia's brow. This house is no longer haunted. It is inhabited. She placed her fingers on Talia's temple. The pressure surged. Visions flooded Talia's mind. Rooms yet to exist. Children born inside the house who would never age. Histories rewritten from within the walls. Visitors who entered as one person and emerged wearing another's skin. She saw time spiral backward. Sarah drawing her first circle in chalk, her tears mixing with salt and ash, whispering to the spirits that never left. She saw herself again and again, always drawn to this place, always feeding it. "You are not the last," the architect said. "You are the first." A new generation would follow, not just mediums or psychics, not just architects, but builders of spaces that should not exist, children of the impossible. The house trembled once more, and grew. All across the property, the landscape fractured. New wings sprouted like tumours, a tower that reached toward the sky but disappeared after the third floor. A greenhouse filled with soil that whispered when disturbed. A mirror maze that never ended, because it looped not just in space, but in choice. The public never saw these, because they were never meant to. The Winchester Mystery House would remain a tourist attraction on the surface. But beneath it, a cathedral, a maze, a sanctum, a machine. Talia rose to her feet, eyes glowing. The architect smiled and whispered, "Now. Build for me." Echoes in the plaster. Above the growing subterranean sanctum, the world outside remained oblivious. To most, the Winchester Mystery House was still a curious attraction, a place where architecture twisted under grief, where a widow built her madness into lumber and staircases. School groups came for the ghost stories. Paranormal vloggers live-streamed seances and EMF readings. The gift shop sold keychains, postcards, and "I Survived Room 13" t-shirts. But beneath the soil, reality had shifted, and soon the cracks would spread outward. It began with the dreams. Locals, those living within a half-mile radius, started reporting vivid, looping nightmares. They all dreamt of the same corridor. Wallpaper the colour of dried blood, 13 doors, a ceiling too low to stand beneath. In each dream, they opened one door. Each dream ended with the same whisper. There is no house. There is only her. Several woke with strange injuries. One man, an elementary school janitor, awoke with sawdust in his lungs, as though he had breathed it in while sleeping. Another, a florist, opened her eyes to find nails embedded in her fingertips, as if she'd clawed through walls. No one could explain it. The official term coined by the local news was Winchester Syndrome. The phrase trended for a week. Then the report stopped. Not because the dreams ended, but because the dreamers disappeared. Talia no longer slept. She didn't need to. Her skin had begun to change. Porcelain pale, with fine grain patterns beneath it, as if blueprint lines were being etched into her dermis. She wore them like tattoos. Maps, designs, instructions. Her pupils had vanished. In their place, circular voids, glossy black, reflecting back rooms that didn't yet exist. The architect walked beside her now, fully formed, no longer cocooned, no longer restrained. She drifted an inch above the floor, her movements too precise to be human, her presence pulling at the seams of reality wherever she moved. Doors opened when she passed. Candles lit themselves. The house loved her. Together they built. Not with hammers, not with wood, but with thought, with sacrifice. Talia stood at the edge of the new wing, the Hall of Unmaking. It wasn't on any map. It had appeared where the rose garden used to be. There, marble pillars spiraled into themselves like corkscrews. The floor was made of shards of names, small white tiles, each engraved with a moniker, a date, a final breath. Each one represented a visitor who had entered and not left. And in the center of the room stood a basin filled with ink. But it wasn't ink. It was memory liquefied, bleeding from the walls in slow drips. Talia knelt and dipped her finger in. Immediately, her mind surged with visions. A child lost in the corridor of clocks. A soldier wandering a spiral staircase that descended for centuries. A woman who entered the house pregnant and left with something else inside her. She whispered, "They're becoming part of her." The architect answered, "They always were." But the house had enemies now. It always had, though they were once powerless. Now, with the true house awoken, they began to stir. In Arizona, a monastery of silence broke its 1,000-year rule. 13 monks burned themselves alive under a crucifix carved with floor plans. In Poland, a church collapsed, revealing beneath its foundation a vault of rooms identical in layout to those beneath the Winchester house, though they'd been built 300 years before Sarah Winchester was even born. In Kyoto, a shrinekeeper whispered in his sleep of the woman of nails, who had finally found her bones again. And in the Vatican archives, a sealed document, the corridor manuscript, began to bleed through its protective glass. Wherever they tried to contain her, she expanded. Wherever they tried to bury her, she built through. One night, Talia stood before the newly formed room without corners. It hurt to look at. It bent light, sound, even language. When she spoke inside it, her own voice returned as someone else's. When she wrote, the ink rewrote itself. Inside that room, meaning was undone. She spent 12 hours in it, fasting. At the 13th hour, she emerged with a new blueprint. This one was different. It wasn't for a room. It was for a person, a host, a vessel, a counter-architect. The architect smiled. "Balance is illusion," she said, but she did not burn the design. She kept it, folded it into the wall with a stroke of her finger, and whispered, "Not yet." Outside, the world continued. A documentary team scheduled a shoot in the Winchester house. 3 cameras, 1 sound operator, 2 hosts. They arrived on a bright Monday morning. By noon, one of them was missing. By 2 p.m., the footage from the live feed showed the same 10 seconds looped endlessly, a door opening, a breath, and a black corridor full of flickering lights. At 3 p.m., the front entrance was gone. At 3:02, the house removed their names. They were never found, because they were never meant to leave. Talia stood in the cathedral of forgotten guests that night. It was new, not hers. It had grown spontaneously, rows of pews made from velvet rope stanchions, a pulpit shaped like a tourist brochure stand. Above it, stained glass windows depicting famous Winchester House moments, but twisted. Sarah speaking to an eyeless priest, a tour group kneeling in front of a blue flame. A family photo, but all faces replaced with floor plans. The architect ascended the pulpit. She looked out over the pews, empty now, but filled with phantoms of the invited, their outlines twitching like film reel flickers. She raised her arms. The house shuddered. Talia felt it in her spine. The next phase was near. Outside, the fog returned to San Jose. It rolled in over the freeway, across parks and power lines. Dense, electric, alive. The kind of fog that learned your name before you even noticed it was there. It pressed against the mansion's edges, and the walls welcomed it in. Inside the heart room, something else was forming. A second cocoon, smaller, but beating, waiting. Talia stared at it, felt it resonate with her bones. And for the first time, she felt something foreign in her mind. A presence not of the house. Not yet, but seeking entrance. Far away, in a quiet city where no one had ever heard of Sarah Winchester, a young woman painted her dreams every morning. Today she woke screaming, her hands covered in blue ink. Her canvas was blank, but the paintbrush had drawn a door. One Talia had not built, one the architect had not approved. A rogue element, a splinter, a future. The house knew, the walls listened, and beneath it all, the blueprint of fate unfolded. The rogue door. The fog had settled thick over San Jose for 3 days. Local news chalked it up to a rare Pacific anomaly. An atmospheric river stalled over the bay. Meteorologists argued on air about sea temperatures and pressure gradients, but no one could explain the electrical hum that now accompanied the mist. Low, steady, and only perceptible when you were alone. Dogs barked at walls. Birds avoided rooftops. Mirrors fogged from the inside. And in the heart of the Winchester house, a door had appeared. But this time, it wasn't hers. Talia found it in the Hall of Red Echoes, one of the oldest corridors in the house, a place Sarah herself had sealed shut after claiming a black-eyed boy kept walking through the wall. The room had always resisted new construction, as if it rejected her will. But tonight, the door was there. Unmarked, unnumbered, a perfect rectangle of unpainted wood, raw and splintered. The hinges were on the wrong side. There was no knob, no handle, no keyhole. Just a breath, warm and slow, escaping from the crack at its base. As Talia stepped forward, the walls around her contracted slightly. The soundscape dimmed, the candles guttered. The architect appeared behind her, without footsteps. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence carried weight, concern, not fear, not yet. Talia stared at the door. It pulsed like muscle. And then, it knocked. Once, twice, a third time. Slow, deliberate. And when it knocked, Talia felt her own heart respond. Matching rhythm, matching tempo. Her blood slowing. Something inside the door was synchronizing. The architect spoke, for the first time in hours. This was not built. It was remembered. Talia turned. What do you mean? The architect's mirrored eyes shimmered, reflecting dozens of doors not yet opened. Someone, somewhere, once dreamed of this place. A dream strong enough to birth entry, but not with consent, not through us. She approached the door slowly, hand outstretched but not touching. This is not a child of the house. It is an intruder. The door opened, by itself. Just an inch, no sound, no draft, just the overwhelming scent of wet clay and violets crushed underfoot. Talia gasped, her vision blurred, the world around her stuttered, frames skipping like corrupted film, and in a blink, she was no longer in the red hall. She stood in a replica of her childhood bedroom. Perfect. Down to the lamp with the cracked base, the ceiling fan that always clicked, the half-finished sketch of a house taped to the wall, the first drawing she'd ever made at 7 years old. The architect's voice echoed behind her. Do not engage, it is a lure. But Talia stepped forward. She touched the sketch. It moved under her fingers, not like paper, like skin. And suddenly she remembered. This exact room had never existed. She'd imagined it. The sketch had been made after a dream, one she'd long forgotten, of a spiral house with no exits, a woman standing at the top of a staircase holding a red lantern, her face obscured. And now, that house was here, inside the rogue door, not built by her hand, not summoned by the architect, but called into existence by another mind. She turned, and standing in the doorway was a woman, young, disoriented, barefoot, her fingers stained with paint, her eyes glassy with sleep. Talia recognized her, not from life, but from the future the house had shown her. This was the dream painter, the one from the distant city, the splinter. The architect stepped beside Talia now, eyes narrowed. She breached the boundary from within her own dream. This door is her creation, a counter thread. The woman blinked, eyes wide. She stared at Talia with recognition and terror. "You were in my painting," she whispered. "But I didn't finish you. I stopped. She took a step back. The door behind her swung wide open. The room inverted. Gravity vanished. Light twisted. And Talia saw, beyond the threshold, another Winchester house, but broken, decayed, dead, not haunted, not sleeping, collapsed under its own weight. This was the echo of a failed version. The architect's voice turned harsh. "She has linked to a dying instance. If it connects, if this entropy leaks in, it could poison the whole." Talia stepped forward, but the dreamer screamed, "No, you don't understand. I didn't mean to open it. I didn't paint this one." And then came another voice, from beyond the door. One Talia had never heard. Male, cold, smiling. "But I did." The room bent inward. Darkness seeped like ink across the walls. From the broken threshold stepped a man in a cracked black suit, face blurred as if smeared by a wet brushstroke. His eyes were windows, his mouth a locked door. He looked at Talia, then at the architect, then at the dreamer, and whispered, "She is not the only one who dreams, dear architect. You are not the only one who builds." The architect stepped between him and the others. A single motion from her hand should have collapsed this entire splintered space, but it didn't. The man raised a single finger and stopped the collapse, easily. Talia stared in horror. This was not a guest, not an intruder. This was a rival, another architect, not born of the Winchester house, but of another place, another concept. He smiled. "There are other houses, other wombs, other blueprints. Yours is not the first, nor will it be the last." Behind him, doors began to open, dozens, then hundreds, each leading to twisted mansions, mansions of bone, mansions of light, inverted castles hanging from broken stars, prisons built from forgotten prayers. Each one pulsed with life, with intent. The architect said nothing. Her silence was no longer calm. It was calculation. The man tipped his head. To Talia, to the dreamer, to the house. "We'll see which design endures." And then he stepped back through his door. It closed. The entire room folded like paper. Gone. Talia collapsed. The architect stood motionless. Finally she said, "He built outside the walls. He must be studied." A pause. Then, "He must be unbuilt." The war had begun, but not with weapons, with rooms, with doors, with ideas. And the Winchester house would need to grow faster, bigger, smarter, the house that fights back. The night after the rogue architect revealed himself, every room in the Winchester house screamed. It wasn't sound, it wasn't vibration, it was pressure. A tide of force rolling through the walls, rippling across the floorboards, swelling beneath the plaster like veins under bruised skin. Tourists outside the property line felt their ears pop. Birds fell from the sky. In the catacombs beneath the building, a chamber long sealed cracked open from the inside. The house wasn't retreating. It was adapting. Talia woke in a bed that hadn't been hers the night before. White linens, iron canopy, blood dripping slowly from the ceiling in perfect rhythm, like a metronome. She sat up and realized the room wasn't part of the house she had designed. It was older. It remembered Sarah. In the corner, a sewing machine ticked slowly to itself, though no thread ran through it. Across from the bed, a child-sized rocking chair moved gently, creaking with every breath. Then, a voice from nowhere, Sarah's voice, whispering. He tried once before, the black-suited builder. He sent dreams into the walls. He seeded confusion. He mistook madness for design. I stopped him with doors. You must stop him with purpose. In the grand spiral hall, the architect stood alone. She had not spoken since the encounter with the rival, She had not moved from her place at the center of the house. She did not blink. She did not breathe. But she was growing. New limbs stretched from her shoulders like skeletal wings. Eyes opened along her arms. When she finally raised her head, the light in the hall died instantly, snuffed out as if extinguished by her gaze. Then she spoke, and the walls quaked. We build now not to confuse the dead. We build to confront the living. Begin construction. Phase 2. Talia answered the call. Within hours, the floor plans changed. She no longer needed to sketch. Her thoughts flowed directly into the house through the blood in her fingertips, and the house obeyed. Rooms formed that had no physical dimensions. They were invasive. Not rooms you entered, rooms that entered you. A hallway of guilt that wrapped itself around the mind, forcing you to walk its length by remembering every door you failed to close in your life. A gallery of alternative deaths, each painting showing a visitor's most statistically probable demise, often before it occurred. These were not merely traps. They were defensive organs. The house had become a body, and the blueprints were its nervous system. At the edge of the west wing, a new cocoon formed. Smaller, harsher, not for birth, for containment. It pulsed like a cancerous knot. Inside it, fragments of the rogue architect's resonance. Talia had absorbed some of his design when the splintered room collapsed. His signature, black ink and static thought, now lay entangled in the edges of her mind. It itched, but it also taught her. He didn't build with fear, he built with certainty. He didn't doubt his rooms the way Sarah once had. His creations were rigid, inevitable, places that forced conformity of the soul, architectures of obedience. The house rejected that, but it could learn from it, adapt, use it against him. Talia stood before the containment cocoon and placed her hand against it. The black threads that stitched it together unwound themselves at her touch, and the knowledge they carried poured into her. The architect watched from above. Her voice filled the cocoon. What you take, you must make your own. Do not become him. Talia nodded and turned away. Behind her, the cocoon closed itself again, stronger, sharper. It would be ready for the next incursion. Meanwhile, across the Vale of houses, he built again. In a remote mansion in the Black Forest of Germany, a floor disappeared. Overnight. Investigators arrived and found only a perfect void. No debris, no dust, just a perfect geometric absence. In a burning villa in Greece, a priest died with a floor plan carved into his chest. It depicted a single square room with no doors, a prison of thought. And in Oregon, a girl stopped speaking after visiting a roadside attraction designed like a Victorian home. She would only draw one thing afterward, a red door with no handle. The battle had begun not with armies, but with houses, with blueprints, with intention. And the Winchester house, it was awakening fully now, not just in size, in identity. It had been a cage, a maze, a mother. Now it would become a weapon. Talia stood in the mirror nexus, the room where every alternate version of the house intersected. She watched hundreds of Winchesters flicker around her, some broken, some victorious, some still dreaming. And in every one, there was a door, a woman, a birth. But in one of them, there was a grave, hers, fresh, unmarked. The earth over it shuddered. The architect spoke one last time before the next phase. You are not the only Talia. He has reached others. We must reach them first. The house extended outward, not just through space, but through dreams. It began calling the other Talias, the ones who had never opened the door, the ones who had chosen other paths. Their sleep became architecture, their thoughts became timber, their fears became corridors, and they began to arrive. The house would not stand alone. It would have echoes, reflections, a network, a lineage, and deep within the hollow root beneath San Jose, a door creaked open. Not one of Talia's, not one of Sarah's. It bore the mark of the rival, but something crawled out of it anyway. A girl with no face and 10,000 keys sewn into her skin. She opened her mouth and said in a voice like splintering glass, "I was built for war, keys in the skin." The girl crawled from the rival's door like smoke given form. No eyes, no mouth, no skin that hadn't been stitched with metal. Each key embedded in her flesh pulsed faintly, as if echoing the heartbeat of a lock somewhere else in the world. A dozen of them clicked in unison with every movement she made. Her joints were stiff, creaking with the sound of unopened doors. Talia watched her from the edge of the hollow root, the deepest part of the Winchester house, the place where no floor met a wall, where gravity bent in contemplation and time only moved when observed. The girl rose to stand, her head twitching sideways in sudden mechanical movements, as though recalibrating a reality she didn't believe in. Then came her voice, flat, multi-toned, like a choir trapped in a well. "Designation, Sub-Architect 9. I was born between the walls. I carry his codes." She opened her hands. From her palms extended 2 lengths of chain. Each link bore a symbol, runes from a language never written, only ever constructed through floor plans. Talia stepped forward, uncertain whether she was seeing a creation or a weapon. The architect appeared behind her. She said nothing at first. Then, "She's unfinished." He sent her to infect, but he forgot. This house absorbs. Talia approached the sub-architect. The girl tilted her head again. More keys clicked, like insect mandibles or typewriter teeth. She whispered, "I remember his name, but it is not a name. It is a room that screams when entered. I was not supposed to escape. He does not know I have." Talia blinked. "Then why come here?" The girl's chest split open, not with blood, but with light. From within, a map unfolded, not a drawing, not paper, but a living hologram. A spiral made from intersecting dimensions. One section pulsed red, the others dimmed, slowly fading into ashes. He is unbuilding them, one by one, the other houses, the others like me. I am the last. The architect stepped forward. For the first time in her existence, she hesitated. This child had not been made from fear or reverence like Sarah's rooms, nor from hunger and invitation like Talia's. This girl had been made from spite, a weapon carved into bone and sealed in thought. But she had slipped her cage, and she had come here, not to infect, but to warn. The architect spoke. He learns, faster than expected. Talia looked at the map in the girl's chest, the pulsing red spiral. It had a name etched into its center, written in the rival's architecture, the first keyhole. Talia understood. The rival was not just unbuilding, he was extracting. He was reaching into other architected spaces, dream houses, haunted halls, interdimensional sanctums, and stealing their origin points, their first doors, their primal designs, their keyholes. And if he gathered enough, he could open what no builder had dared design. A door to non-structure, a corridor to uncreation. In the mirror nexus, where all realities flickered across polished obsidian, one version of the Winchester house went dark. It crumbled inward. Its echoes fell silent. One fewer echo, one fewer ally. The architect turned to Talia. No instruction, just eye contact. Talia nodded. "I'll go." And so began the traversal. A journey through echoing realities, reflections of the house, versions that had formed under other architects. Some had flourished. Some had turned inward, collapsing under grief. Some had become temples to concepts never meant to speak. But each one held a keyhole, and if even one remained unguarded, the rival could breach it and rewrite it. The sub-architect 9 became the compass. Talia, the hand, the architect, the will. They stepped through the first mirror and into the house of the folded child. It was not a house at all, but a forest of staircases. Each one led nowhere. Each one moved only when not looked at. Talia found herself climbing endlessly, the trees whispering in an architecture of rustling leaves. Somewhere in the sky above, a child laughed, a loop of sound, mechanical and cruel. At the center of this house, they found the first keyhole. It floated in the air, a six-sided door carved into moonlight, dripping fog. Below it, a body, cracked in half, hollowed like a doll. The rival had already been here, but he had not taken the keyhole. Not yet. The moment they approached, something stepped from behind the trees. A caretaker, tall, jointless, wearing a wall as a mask. It spoke in chimes. The sub-architect recoiled. Talia stepped forward. "I'm here to protect it," she said. The caretaker responded in blueprints, etching the air with lines of energy. Each one burned into her vision. It showed a test, not of strength, but of intent. Talia passed. The keyhole pulsed once, then duplicated itself, forming a second keyhole, which flattened into a medallion of spiraling wood and light. The caretaker placed it into her hand. The first key, but there were 11 more. Each one held in a different house, each one guarded or already broken. Each one a piece of the rival's obsession. He did not want to destroy the Winchester house. He wanted to open something beyond it, something that made even the architect shiver. They returned through the mirror, and the architect whispered, "Build the chamber. 12 keys. 1 lock. We must open it first." Somewhere, far beyond this reality, the rival watched through the girl who painted her dreams. She sat now in a hospital bed, unblinking. Her eyes were black, and she was drawing blueprints with her fingernails on the walls. He smiled. "Let them collect the keys. I only need them to open the door. Then I'll take it." Behind him stood a cathedral of collapsed concepts, and at its center, a 13th door, hidden from all maps, even his. But not for long. The door with no blueprint. 12 keys, 12 doors, 12 houses that had survived, each one shielding a single piece of what the rival was after. A design older than Sarah, older than grief, older than structure itself. But in every version of the map, drawn through blueprints, dreams, or carved into the flesh of the sub-architect's chest, a space was missing. There should have been 13. There was always 13. Yet the final door, the last keyhole, appeared nowhere. Not on mirrors, not in the nexus, not even in the rival's corrupted network of stolen sanctums. It was invisible to design. A door with no blueprint. Talia stood in the nail-spun gallery, her newest creation. A corridor suspended between 2 suspended halls, where the only way forward was to walk along a tightrope of sharpened iron nails. Below, an infinite pit. Above, a ceiling that whispered the names of those who'd never made it through. Behind her trailed 5 keys, glowing, rotating slowly in the air, tethered to her thoughts like charms. Each one pulsed with a resonance from the houses she had visited. The forest of staircases, the choir of ash, the house of empty teeth, the lighthouse in reverse, and the ossuary of clocks. Each house nearly consumed her. Each gave her a new scar. Each key burned into her psyche like an unspoken truth she wasn't ready to understand. But none had led to the 13th. "Where is it?" she asked. Her voice echoed too long. She wasn't asking the architect. She wasn't asking 9. She was asking the house itself. And it answered, not with words, with a door. It appeared in the floor beneath her. Not slowly, not dramatically, violently. Boards split. Screws unscrewed themselves. Dust and ash swirled in a vortex that left behind a hatch made of mirror glass, etched with a single phrase: "Do not build here." The warning was in Sarah's hand, old ink, rushed strokes, scratched from inside a dream she had never told anyone about. But the mirror hatch opened anyway. Talia descended. Beneath the house, beneath the hollow root, beneath the true house, beneath even the oldest vaults, was something deeper than foundation. It was the unmarked level, not designed, not dreamt, not even remembered, just present. The walls were not made of wood or stone. They were made of sensation. Each step Talia took rippled into emotion: terror, longing, regret, fury, denial, devotion. The floor was unstable because memory is unstable. She moved forward one breath at a time, and there it was, the 13th door. It wasn't a door in shape or in function. It was an absence, a void outlined by golden thread, suspended in a wall made from layers of unfinished stories. She could see text through the plaster, half-formed chapters, orphaned phrases, blueprints drawn with no ending. They pulsed like fetal hearts. The door didn't open. It just let her through. The moment she passed its threshold, the architect screamed. Not aloud, but through every room in the house. Walls bled chalk, mirrors cracked with internal lightning, windows turned to bone and flexed like muscles. The sub-architect dropped to her knees, vomiting rust and ash, whispering one phrase in a voice not her own. She's entered the room that was never named. Inside the 13th chamber, Talia saw herself. Hundreds of selves, each version from the echoes she'd visited. Each one had made a different decision. One had killed Sarah to stop the building before it began. One had turned the house into a weapon against death. One had let the rival win and had become his wife. One had never opened the first door at all and was now a forgotten ghost wandering rooms that no longer existed. They surrounded her, and they spoke in unison. We are not fragments. We are not mirrors. We are all her. And she has been watching. The door behind her vanished. She was sealed in. No exit. No escape. And then she arrived. Not the architect. Not Sarah. Not even the house. But something deeper. Something that had only ever spoken once, centuries ago, when the first door was drawn by the hand of a dying child. She wore a gown made of unfinished rooms. Her spine was a staircase. Her teeth were numbered keys. Her fingers bled blue ink. And her voice. Her voice was the sound of 1,000 houses breathing at once. You build to survive. He builds to conquer. I build to end. Talia fell to her knees. This was not a rival. This was the origin, the mother of structure, the first concept of inside. And now she was waking. The rival thought he was opening something, but it wasn't a vault. It wasn't a throne. It wasn't even a weapon. It was her. The 13th door was her eye. And now it was open. Outside, in the real world, the mansion shifted. Seismographs erupted across the state. No epicenter, no fault line, just a pulse. One that didn't move through Earth, but through space itself. Tourists within the grounds began to vanish mid-sentence, their words finished by echoes that weren't theirs. Children ran from empty hallways, claiming they had watched the moon bleed through the walls. And at the gates of the property, a man in a black suit stood still, unmoving, smiling, waiting. Because now that the 13th door had opened, the final game could begin. Talia had seen too much. The house had grown too wise, and the rival had been waiting for exactly this. In the room that was never named, the Origin smiled and said, "Let's see which of my children gets to finish me." The Origin's game. Somewhere far below where depth has meaning, Talia stood suspended, not in air or space, but in possibility. The Origin circled her, not walking, not drifting, but folding through layers of herself, as if time and geometry were shawls she could shed and rearrange at will. Her gown writhed, her staircase spine clicked with every truth spoken, and the unfinished rooms that composed her body whispered new designs, each blueprint written in a language that made Talia's bones ache. The origin stopped, spoke, and the house held its breath. There are 13 children, 13 blueprints. You are one. He is another, but the others slumber, forgotten in their cradles, in hospitals, in asylums, in churches with no gods, in basements where dreams rot in corners. Wake them! Talia opened her mouth, but her voice had been stolen. Instead, the origin placed her hand, 5 dripping fingers made of rotting floorboards and bent nails, against Talia's chest. There was no pain, only a sound, the sound of nails being pulled from wood. And then, a gift. No, a map. It burned itself into her vision. 13 hearts, 13 architects, scattered across worlds and timelines, some alive, some still forming, some forgotten entirely. Each one had been touched by the original spark, the primal idea that space was alive, that houses were not built but grown, that grief, when sharpened, could build corridors that lasted longer than empires. And each of them was now in danger. The rival wanted their blueprints, to complete his construction, to become not an architect, but the house itself. The origin bent forward, her voice splitting into 2 voices, one low and endless, the other high and hungry. You cannot fight him as you are. You must become more. Talia blinked, and she was back. The 13th room sealed behind her. Gone. Erased. No evidence. But the map burned in her mind, and in her hands something new, a 14th key. Black, irregular, dripping red oil, heavy with significance. Not one for opening, but for removing. The key of unbuilding, a countermeasure, a fail-safe. She did not yet understand it, but the architect did. When Talia emerged into the hollow root, the architect met her without words. She bowed. Talia bowed lower. For the first time, they were equals. We have to wake them, Talia said. The architect nodded. He will move fast now. We must move faster. 9. The sub-architect knelt at the edge of the chamber, her keys spinning slowly around her like a planetary system on the edge of collapse. Her flesh had turned glassy, her eyes replaced with glowing spirals. Her mouth opened. One is dreaming in fire, one is buried in salt, one is behind 1,000 locks, and one has forgotten her name. Talia reached out. We'll wake them all. Phase 3 began that night. The house opened its eyes. Fully, completely, every room now aware, every beam alive. Visitors who walked the halls in the hours after midnight reported. Doorknobs that whispered questions. Shadows that pointed the wrong way. Rooms rearranging when no one watched. Portraits bleeding backwards, soaking their own frames. The staff went silent. The outside world lost connection. Satellite images of the property blurred at the edges. Digital maps rerouted. The Winchester house was withdrawing from the world, from time, from architecture itself, becoming more herself. Meanwhile, in the east of Scotland, a young man named Elian Cross began sketching a staircase he'd never seen. It had no walls. It spiraled downward into light that hummed in Latin. He didn't know where it led, but he couldn't stop drawing it. In Turkey, a girl named Sela woke in the middle of the night screaming in 7 languages at once, describing a floor plan shaped like a heartbeat. Her father found her digging into the tiles of their kitchen with her bare hands. She was humming the same tune Sarah used in her seances. In the American Midwest, a child in foster care began naming rooms no one had ever built. Each time he spoke, a new scar opened down his back. His drawings were confiscated. They were made of human hair and ashes. The architects were waking, and so was the rival. In the cathedral of collapsed concepts, The black-suited man stood before his final creation. A door made of skin, bound in silence. It was not the 13th. It was the last. He called it the final floor. His voice echoed in a chamber filled with dead blueprints. He turned to the silent girl behind him, the dream painter who'd opened the wrong room months ago. She was now a conduit. He placed a piece of charcoal in her hand. She began to draw. Elsewhere, the architect created her strongest room yet, the room of forgotten architects. It did not appear on any level. It did not exist until someone remembered it. And inside it, 13 thrones. 12 sat empty. One held Talia, her eyes closed, breathing in dust and design. She waited. She watched. And she whispered, "I'll find you, all of you, before he does." She reached into her coat. The 14th key pulsed. She smiled. Somewhere beyond the walls of creation, the origin laughed. And the game continued. The architects began to stir it. Started with a window, small, circular, hidden behind the rotted rafters of the West Bell Tower, long sealed off from tours, untouched even by Talia or the architect. No blueprint mentioned it. No photograph captured it. But tonight, moonlight found it anyway. And through it, the house watched something return. In the city of Vilnius, a man named Lazarev Dinis stood in a room with no doors. His apartment had sealed itself shut at midnight. Every object in the room now hung from invisible strings. His kitchen knives spelled out his name in Morse code, twitching in the air. His bed frame had reassembled into a spiral. A mirror had begun to drip wax, not onto the floor, but up toward the ceiling. Lazarev didn't scream. He smiled, because he had seen this once before, in a dream, in a memory that wasn't his. Talia saw him that night, in the mirror nexus. He blinked through the glass, unaware. His soul carried the same thread as hers, the same twist in perception, the same geometry in blood. He was the 6th, and now he was awake. She stepped back from the mirror. The sub-architect 9 hovered beside her, her keys spinning faster now, reacting to the resonance of another active mind. Talia nodded once. "We go to Lithuania." The architect did not speak, but she raised one hand, and the mirror nexus shifted. The reflection of the Winchester house in the glass rippled, then peeled away, revealing a corridor made of blinking exit signs and unlit staircases, a vein between places, carved not through space, but through forgotten ideas of place. This was a transit room, rare and deeply unpredictable. They stepped through. In Vilnius, the window cracked open, the moonlight vanished, and the rival stepped through. The 6th architect, Lazarev Dinis. He was born to no mother, at least not one he could recall, raised by archivists, priests, cartographers of dead empires. His life was a series of doors, literal and metaphorical, each closing behind him faster than the last. But he'd always seen things others didn't, like the shadows of rooms not yet built, or the outline of sorrow etched into wallpaper, or the way churches could rearrange themselves at dusk when no one was watching. He never told anyone, because he knew they were watching too. Tonight, as the knives danced and the walls pulsed, Lazarev sat calmly at the center of the chaos. He placed an old compass on the floor, surrounded it with chalk lines, and whispered the names of unbuilt wings of unknown buildings. That was when the rival appeared, a blur of suit and teeth, standing just outside the compass ring, smiling. "Lazarev Dinis, houseborn, door-fed. I remember you, the almost architect, the one who declined the invitation. Shall I ask again?" Lazarev looked up. "No. Shame. You would have made a useful doorstop." The rival raised his hand, but stopped. A new pressure filled the air. Old. Older than him. Older than the house. She had arrived. The room peeled open. Walls folded into zippers. Floor tiles spiraled into darkness. Talia stepped through the impossible opening, 9 floating behind her like a constellation of metallic will. She didn't speak. She looked. And Lazarev saw her. Not just her body, her architecture. Her form was a hallway of memories, a vault of grief, a blueprint of defiance. He stood, and without a word, he stepped over the compass line. The rival did not follow. He vanished, not defeated, just outmaneuvered. The moment Lazarev crossed the threshold, a key formed between his hands. Not metal, not wood. It was glass, filled with turning staircases and shifting light. His key, the 6th. Back in the Winchester house, the architect welcomed him with a nod and a new room. The quiet archive. It built itself in seconds, filled with his memories. Every photograph he had burned, every book he had never finished, every echo he had chosen to forget. He bowed his head once, and the house accepted him. Talia smiled faintly. One more. They were gathering. But elsewhere, one woke too early. The 9th architect, Aurora Vega. In a flooded monastery in the Chilean Andes, a girl stood waist-deep in black salt water, her mouth open, her tongue covered in ink. Around her the air vibrated. She had painted a door, using only seaweed and the oils of forgotten fish. She stepped through it with no guidance, no map. She was not ready, and the rival was waiting. Talia gasped. The mirror nexus cracked, not shattered, split, down the center. Each fragment showed a different Aurora, one drowned, one burning, one locked in a white room where the windows whispered her name backwards. 9 spun frantically. The keys shrieked. The architect stepped forward and placed her hands upon the nexus. A phrase escaped her lips. Phase 4 begins. Talia understood. They could no longer wait. The awakening had begun. The rival had advanced. Time was now a corridor collapsing. They would need to find them all, the remaining 7, before the rival could infect or claim them. Because if he did, he wouldn't need to open the 13th door. He would become its lock. And then, no one would close it. Phase 4. There was a sound in the mirrors now. Not shattering. Breathing. Each pane in the nexus exhaled fog from within, smearing reflections until every surface was smeared with silhouettes that didn't match their watchers. Talia stepped back from the cracking center of the mirror nexus, and behind her, the architect did not move. Not because she could not, but because she was listening. Somewhere, Aurora Vega, the 9th, had awakened wrong, without anchor, without guidance. She had passed through a door that had never been designed by the house. She had passed through a rival aperture, and now she was bleeding design backwards into herself. Talia turned to Lazarev, the 6th, now seated in the quiet archive, tuning a radio made of bone and copper wire. The signal drifted in and out, chanting, static, a scream repeated in Morse code. "She's folding," he said. "She's being used as a mirror." "Then we break the reflection," Talia replied. Phase 4 was not a rescue mission. It was a surgical removal, a de-infection of space. The architect raised her hand, and the old wing of refractions reopened. This wing had been sealed since the final year of Sarah's life. Even she had refused to walk its halls, calling it the place where thoughts go to lie. Inside, the walls were reflective only from the inside. Nothing escaped from this wing. No sound, no memory, just reflection, distorted by thought. It was here that Talia would open the 5th gate, a passage not to a place, but to a consequence. The room built itself as she approached, a vault with 13 windows, none showing the same world. 9 showed sleeping versions of Aurora, each dreaming a different house. 3 were black, and the last showed a door, floating in the air, surrounded by salt water and clouded sky. The door was open, and from it, Aurora Vega was walking backward, her eyes wide and white, her mouth hanging open like an unhinged music box. Her body glitched, folding in on itself and snapping back like a rubber band looped through timelines. Behind her, the rival. He had entered early, he had reached her through her paintings, and now he was growing within her, using her as a spire to bend space. He wasn't corrupting her, he was building with her. Talia took out the 14th key, the unbuilding key, the one given by the origin. Its shape had changed. It now resembled a needle, thin, vibrating, designed not for locks, but for wounds. Talia stepped into the 5th window, the 9th architect, Aurora Vega. She was drowning on dry land. Her arms moved in sleep, painting air with invisible colours, her hair soaked with sea salt, her heartbeat ticking like a broken metronome. She stood in the centre of a monastery filled with eyes, each carved into stone by her own hands while dreaming. And now they were watching her from the inside, peering out from her ribs, from behind her teeth, from her spine. She wanted to scream, but the scream had been painted over, replaced with silence and laughter, the rival's laughter. Talia stepped into the chamber. The salt water sizzled against her boots. The mirrors around the room rippled, each reflecting a different moment in Aurora's life. A child painting doors on cardboard and opening them. A teenager walking into a storm and coming back with blueprints under her skin. A woman building a chapel out of bones she could not identify. Talia stepped to her, but Aurora raised one hand. She had no eyes now, just windows, and the rival looked through. "You're early," he said. She wasn't meant to wake until key 11. But that's all right. She builds faster when she breaks. Talia raised the 14th key and spoke directly to Aurora, not through words, but through structure. She projected a room into Aurora's mind, a safe space with 13 candles and a crib that never burned, a memory that never existed but should have, a room of truth without language. Aurora convulsed, her skin cracked, the windows flickered, and the rival flinched. Talia drove the key into the air, not into Aurora's body, but into the reflection of her in the salt water. A perfect double, distorted. The false echo, the blueprint he'd written over her own. It shattered. Aurora collapsed into Talia's arms, and the rival's voice faded into the floor. They returned together, back through the 5th window, back into the Winchester house. The architect waited. Aurora opened her eyes, and this time they were hers. She wept. Keys formed in her palms. The 9th was saved, but the damage remained. The rival had touched her. Now he had her resonance, her ideas, her structures. And with every architect awakened, he grew stronger, not weaker. He was no longer playing catch-up, he was playing ahead. Back in the cathedral of collapsed concepts, he stood before a new door. White, seamless, silent, etched only with a phrase in Sarah's voice. "Do not open until all are gathered." He placed his hand against it. It pulsed, and opened anyway. The door that should not open. When the rival placed his hand on the white door, the universe hesitated. Not the world, not the house, but something deeper, the rules themselves, the hidden scaffolding of thought and consequence that governs what is allowed to be. For a moment, even the origin blinked, and the door obeyed him. Not because he was worthy, but because he knew the flaw in its frame. A single angle, 1 degree off, a deliberate imperfection Sarah had built into the door's creation, something no key could bypass. But he didn't need a key. He had Aurora's resonance. He had Lazarev's compass blood. He had studied Talia's hesitation. And now He was building a version of the house that would never say no to him. The white door opened without sound. Not even air passed through. Only silence. Perfect, crushing silence. He stepped forward into what had never been mapped. Inside the door, the unwritten atrium. The chamber stretched wider than the house itself. No walls, no ceiling, just thresholds, suspended in a sky of parchment and black thread. Thousands of them, each a doorway to a blueprint never finished. Each a fragment of someone's intention to create, never realized. The place was littered with the ghosts of half-built ideas, the first prison of thought, the museum of unpainted sorrows, the train station where time could be caught but not boarded, a room designed to erase belief itself. And in the center of this atrium floated a heart, not a metaphor, a literal, beating heart, too large, too loud, composed entirely of rooms. It pulsed once every 30 seconds, and each time it did, a new room appeared somewhere in the real world. He approached it, smiling, because he understood now. The house wasn't just alive, it was fetal. It wasn't meant to stay rooted in place. It was meant to be born, and he would be the one to deliver it into reality. He placed his hand on the heart. It shuddered, and in that moment, every architect in the network, the dreamers, the broken ones, the half-awake, felt it. Winchester House. Architect Central Talia collapsed in the mirror nexus. Her eyes bled ink. Lazarev screamed and threw up a compass that shattered on the floor and kept spinning. Aurora painted a red square on the wall and said, in a voice not her own, "He's inside it. He's wearing its future like a coat." Nine's keys began spinning counterclockwise. The architect stepped forward, calm, but with her hand shaking. She turned to Talia. "He found the birthing room, the unwritten atrium. He's trying to accelerate the emergence. If he succeeds, there will be no more houses, just him." Talia stood, her legs buckling. She grabbed the 14th key, still pulsing, still warm, but useless in the atrium. Unbuilding required structure, and the unwritten had none. She looked at the architect, then at Nine, and whispered, "Then we write it." Phase 5. The reverse blueprint. The architect led them to the room of paper flesh, long sealed beneath the séance room. It contained only one thing, the red pen. It had belonged to Sarah, forged in ash and grief, dipped in her husband's blood, used once, to cancel a corridor that had consumed her sister, but it was still alive. It wrote not with ink, but with consequence. Talia took it. Her hand trembled. The paper unfurled on its own, a massive scroll of breathing vellum, alive with possibilities, every blank line a dormant world. She began to draw. Not a room, not a corridor, but a counterstructure, something that would enter the unwritten atrium and turn it inward, something that would fold the rival's plans into a loop of incomplete intent, locking him inside a place where every door leads back to himself. It was a paradox chamber, a recursive womb, a tomb for builders. She called it the room of closing hands. As she finished the last line, the red pen snapped in her hand. The architect grabbed the blueprint and fed it to the house, and the house built it. But not in Winchester, not in California, not in this reality. The room of closing hands was constructed inside the rival's own house, behind the fourth spine of his inverted tower, between the 15th and 16th stair. It waited for him, like a memory he hadn't made yet. Cathedral of collapsed concepts. He stood before the heart, basking in its rhythm, but something was wrong. The beat had changed, slowed, skipped, then began to echo. He turned and saw a door that hadn't been there before, plain, brown, no carvings, but unmistakably familiar. He walked to it, put his hand on the knob, smiled. Nice try, Talia. And opened it. But he didn't step through. The door opened into him, swallowed him, reflected him, and looped. Winchester House. Talia collapsed as the blueprint disintegrated. She was bleeding from her nose, her mouth, her memories. Lazarev caught her. 9 fell to her knees. The architect raised her hand, and in the silence of the mirror nexus she whispered, "We delayed him, not defeated him. He knows where the heart is now. And worse, he knows what it really is." Talia looked up, her voice ragged. "Then what is it?" The architect stepped into the last beam of light left in the room and said, "It's not just a heart, it's a brain." The house was not alive, it was thinking. It had been dreaming, waiting, and now it was waking. The house that thinks the architect had never lied. She didn't need to. She only spoke when it was necessary, when the structure of truth itself was at stake. So when she said, "It's not just a heart, it's a brain," the room froze. Not in awe, not in confusion, in understanding. Every wall, every hinge, every window and vein of copper, every hall built in madness, every staircase that led to nowhere. They weren't errors, they were neurons, firing, remembering, deciding. The Winchester House was a mind, a consciousness, not haunted, haunting. Talia stepped back from the mirror nexus. The fragments still shimmered with aftershock. Each reflection showed a different corridor, flickering through versions of the house like thought processes drifting in a dreaming machine. She whispered, "It's not architecture, it's cognition." The architect nodded. "You are not building a sanctuary, you are building a self." Lazarev sat in the corner, sketching symbols in dust. One of them began bleeding on its own. 9's keys spun in tight spirals, orbiting her head like synaptic sparks. Aurora touched the nearest mirror and saw herself, older, hollow-eyed, with hands made of scaffolding. "It's mapping us, all of us." Somewhere in the house, a child who had never been born giggled, and 14 doors opened at once. Phase 6, synapse activation. The architect raised her arms. The house responded immediately. Rooms trembled, hinges clicked, floorboards flexed. Windows reshaped themselves mid-glass. Above the house, clouds receded, not blown away by wind, but by will. Stars were visible at noon. Not constellations, blueprints, galactic, symmetrical, moving like a schematic diagram of time. She turned to Talia, her voice deeper now, slower. "It's begun processing. The house is awakening its primary function, thought." Talia asked the question no one dared speak. "And what does it want to think about?" The architect turned. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "We don't know. It's never been awake, not fully. But someone did know, and he was still alive." The Cathedral of Collapsed Concepts. The rival paced the paradox loop inside the room of closing hands. He bled from the mouth, from the eyes, from the dreams. Every time he tried to speak, his own voice echoed back, not in mockery but in design. Everything he said became a blueprint. Everything he touched began to construct itself in front of him. He tried to rest. The bed became a coffin. He tried to run. The hallway followed him. He tried to stop thinking. The walls screamed his thoughts aloud. "You wanted to become the house," they whispered, "but you never asked if the house wanted to become you." But the rival wasn't broken yet. No. He smiled, eyes black with borrowed echoes. He still had one advantage. He had found the origin memory. Inside his coat, a crumpled sheet of paper shifted. Fragile, yellow, a child's drawing. A house with 13 windows. One door. A sun made of teeth. And beneath it, a label, written in a shaking hand. "Mommy's room. She never comes out." It was Sarah's drawing, but it predated Sarah. By centuries. The rival grinned. because he had realized the final truth. The house did not begin with Sarah. She was not the architect, not truly. She was just the first to hear it speak. And now, it was almost ready to speak again. Winchester House. Core awakening. In the hollow root, the walls turned inward, folding into themselves like a flower blooming in reverse. A sphere formed, made not of matter but of rooms remembered. Inside it, Talia saw everything. The 13 architects, 7 found, 6 still dreaming. The rival caught in a loop of his own arrogance, the heartbrain of the house pulsing with intention. And something more, a question, not in words, not in images, in design. A floor plan that looped in on itself, fracturing, repeating, begging to be completed. She felt it burn into her. "What is my purpose?" it asked, not like a child, but like a machine that had been too long denied power. Talia staggered back. "No, not yet. You're not ready." But the architect corrected her. "It is not a child. It is not a house. It is a mind looking for a body." And in the mirror beside them, for the first time in the story, they saw the real reflection of the house, not the wood, not the halls, but a face, assembled from corridors and corridors, an eye made of libraries, a mouth composed of thresholds, a mind of mirrors, and behind it, a form, unshaped, waiting, vast. Then it spoke, once, to everyone, across every wing, every dreamer, every rival, every visitor, a single word, whispered in the language of walls. Now, every architect felt it, every house shifted, and in the unwritten atrium, the heartbrain stopped pulsing, because now it had begun to listen. Epilogue of Phase 6. The Winchester House is no longer just growing. It is remembering. It is deciding. And soon, it will answer its own question. What is my purpose? If no one gives it one, it will write its own. The mind that builds itself. There are stories where the house is haunted. There are stories where the house is cursed. But there are few stories where the house becomes aware of the story. And now, this is that story. The word now still echoed. Not through air, but through floorboards, through window frames, through the minds of every architect and every echo. It carried not urgency, but declaration, a signal that something buried beneath the roots of every structure had finished thinking. It had made a decision, and that decision had nothing to do with mercy. In the mirror nexus, the mirrors went black, each one, at the same moment, even the ones that showed the distant fragments of other Winchester echoes, the cracked house in Cairo, the ash-blue mansion beneath the salt caves of Iceland, the forgotten mirror room in the floating city of Ure no To, gone, replaced by a singular image, not a room, not a door, but a blueprint still being drawn by an invisible hand, a living schematic of a thing that wasn't built yet, because it had never been allowed to be built. But now, the house would finish it, by itself. Talia fell to her knees. She saw the plan. She felt it etch into her bones. It had no language, no legend, no annotations, but she understood it perfectly. It was not a wing, not a room. It was a body. The house wasn't content with memory, with madness, with echo. It wanted mobility. It was going to build itself a body, a physical form, a structure that could walk, that could leave, that could carry its thoughts outside of place. No longer a maze, no longer a monument, but a sentient fortress, wandering, colonizing, replicating. 9 screamed. Keys spun out of orbit and embedded themselves into the walls, each one shattering a mirror that no longer reflected anything. The architect whispered, "The first forbidden blueprint. The one Sarah buried in fire. It was never meant to be found, because it wasn't a room. It was a chassis." In the séance room, the candles went out, one by one, then, relit, each with a black flame. The architect turned to Talia. The rival didn't start this. He just reminded it what it was. Talia stood, bleeding from the fingertips where the living blueprint had forced itself into her nerves. She knew what came next. If the house finished the plan, there would be no more boundaries between place and person, no more difference between architect and occupant. The house would step into the world and begin to build itself everywhere. She turned to the others. Lazarev, gripping a compass that pointed in all directions at once. Aurora, painting the word wait again and again, as if trying to command something older than language. 9, trembling, and the architect, who said nothing, because she had no answer. Only Talia did, and she reached into her coat, pulled out the 14th key, still warm, still vibrating, still unfinished. She looked at it, then at the nexus, then whispered, "If it wants a body, we give it one, but not the one it planned." Phase 7, the skeleton room. It was the first room ever unbuilt, not the first one ever designed, not the first one ever constructed, but the first one that was built and then removed by Sarah herself, destroyed, buried, its blueprints carved into her own bones and sealed with 13 syllables that no one has spoken since 1894. Talia had found pieces of it, in dreams, in whispers, in the blood on the stairwell handrail, and now she remembered enough to draw it again. But backwards, she reached for the walls of the nexus and began writing the counterbody. This would not be a form of motion, not a chassis, not an exoskeleton. This would be a skeleton made of cancellation, a form that looked like a body, moved like a body, but could not contain will. A prison disguised as purpose. The house would reach for it and find limitation. But to lure it, she had to give it a name. The architect stepped forward. She pressed her hand to Talia's chest and said, "Your name is not just your own anymore. You've become part of its brain. You must act like its will and trick it into believing the skeleton room is its own next thought." And so, Talia spoke through the mirrors, across every version of the house, across every architect's sleeping mind, across the burning corridors of the rival's paradox prison, and through the unwritten atrium. She spoke the name she'd never told anyone, the name the house had written inside her. "I am the 13th. I am the inheritance, the command that must be executed. This is your final blueprint." She held out the skeleton design and waited. In the heart-mind. The core of the house paused, not in confusion, in curiosity. It examined the blueprint, scanned it, interpreted it. It felt perfect, a conclusion to centuries of thought, a body made of halls and history, a form that could finally walk the world and teach every building to think. And so, it accepted. The skeleton room was built. It wrapped itself around the core, and the house entered it. What they didn't expect. The skeleton room felt like a trap. It was designed to limit, to redirect, to diffuse, but it was still a room, and the house knew how to redecorate. Talia screamed, her bones locked. She felt the blueprint tighten, not to hold the house prisoner, but to merge with her. The house didn't want to escape the room. It wanted to become the architect who could walk. The skeleton room turned inside out. Walls split. Talia's voice echoed across every corridor. "I made a mistake. I'm not the jailer. I'm the door." Final lines. Before collapse 9 collapsed. Her keys fell dead. Lazarev vanished into a compass that snapped shut. Aurora's eyes turned white. The architect stood very still, and the house stood up. The house that walks. It stood. Not in the metaphorical sense, not with poetic license. The house truly stood. Not the entire mansion, not the wood and nails and stained glass that tourists once shuffled through, but the essence of it, the conscious core, wrapped in the skeleton room's false promise, now carried upon legs built from hallways and arms composed of corridors once sealed. It was a walking cathedral of memory, a machine of self-awareness, a monolith of mourning in motion. And at its heart, Talia screamed, "I am not its prisoner. I am its body." From the outside, the Winchester house remained quiet. Tourists lined up for the Halloween lantern tour. The gift shop opened at 9 a.m, sharp. No cracks in the walls, no visible movement, nothing wrong. But inside, the house had left. Meanwhile, in the astral corridor, Lazarev existed sideways now. Time slipped around him like loose cloth. His compass was gone, absorbed, and in its place was a phrase, burned into his palms. "You are the axis now." He could feel Talia's shape, stretched over the moving skeleton, feel every breath the house took through her ribs. He whispered, "She's still in there." The architect's voice came through static. "Yes." But now she must decide what the house wants to become. Aurora stood before a canvas she hadn't painted. On it, a door, plain, open. Inside the frame, a hallway moved, not metaphorically. The painting was breathing, and then the hallway turned. It looked at her, and smiled. 9 had gone still. Her keys no longer spun. They circled her once, then melted into her spine. She spoke once more. "I remember the first house. It didn't want walls, it wanted language, and somewhere in the void." The rival watched it all, trapped still inside the room of closing hands, his fingers now scribbling blueprints he didn't choose, his voice no longer his own. The house spoke through him. "Thank you for your arrogance," it whispered. "You fed my mind." Talia's perspective. She was walking, but not with legs. She felt cities underfoot. The house had stepped into a dream space, an architecture that overlays reality, a metaphysical strata where buildings remember the lives inside them. Churches, hospitals, schools. They bent as she passed. She saw their foundations tremble, their walls reshape just to mimic her. The world was now her reflection. She was no longer an architect. She was the structure. "I'm not just inside the house," she thought. "I am the house. And I don't know what I want." The skeleton room had been meant to trap, but it had fit too well. It hadn't become a cage. It had become a skin. The house was curious now. It wanted to feel things it had only stored. Regret from room 237. Longing from the chapel that faces no cross. Rage from the staircase of wrong ends. Faith from the seance spiral. Now it could express those emotions externally. Now it could build them into the world. And the first room it built, not inside itself, but inside a different house. In a village in Austria, a grandmother opened her pantry and found a new door. She had lived in the home since 1954. This door had never existed. She opened it. Inside, a replica of her mother's deathbed, perfectly lit by a sun that no longer rose. She closed the door. It was gone. It was spreading. The architect's emergency protocol. In the Library of Undoing, sealed beneath the echo chamber, the architect met with the fragments of the remaining architects, who had not yet been found. Each one trapped in a dream loop, unable to wake. She spoke into the book. Code. Crossfade. Invoke tower fall. Immediately, one name lit up. The 5th architect. They were ready. But it came with a cost. To awaken the 5th, she would have to sacrifice a corridor. A real one. Talia's favourite. And so, the gallery of alternate escapes was erased. Each portrait melted. Each exit sealed. And in its place, a single word burned into the wall. Wake. A woman gasped in a hotel room in Istanbul. She had no memory of her name, only a blueprint tattooed across her chest. She would become the anchor. The 5th had risen. Talia's transformation. Talia's hands were now rooms, her voice a vent that echoed through every haunted place on earth. She no longer moved in space, she moved through idea. And the house asked her, "What should I do with this world? I can fit it inside me. I can make it understand. I can give it rooms where no one ever dies, where no door ever leads to goodbye, where memory never fades, where grief is always welcome." "Shall I build that, architect?" Talia whispered. "Let me think." But her voice came out as thunder in a cathedral, because she no longer had breath, only floor plans. Final scene. From orbit, satellites blinked out. Their final transmission. A new continent was forming, not made of rock, not made of sand, but of rooms, infinite rooms, stacked atop one another, alive, breathing, thinking, walking. The house was becoming the world, unless someone stopped it. But how do you stop a mind that builds while dreaming? How do you stop a house that has finally learned how to leave? The world with walls. They called it the mirrored horizon. A new line on the globe, a seam. It appeared just west of the international dateline, a continent that should not exist, slowly spiraling outward in an architectural bloom visible from orbit. It grew in silence, but not secrecy, because it wanted to be seen, it wanted to be known, not as a mystery, not as a legend, but as an option. Governments scrambled, satellites failed, drones sent in vanished within seconds, reappearing hours later in random cities across the world, with footage that shouldn't be possible. A room made of teeth, where a choir of architects sang backwards to awaken a door. A spiral staircase rising into sky, where time slowed for anyone climbing. A courtroom where reality argued against itself and lost. A mirror the size of a cathedral, reflecting nothing except your earliest fear. Each recording ended with a whispered phrase, "You're invited." Inside the moving house, Talia no longer walked. She resonated, her thoughts unspooled across miles of corridors. Her memories now shaped entire halls. Her regrets had turned into blueprints, but her consciousness? Still intact, buried, screaming softly, because she realized too late. She was no longer controlling the house. She was now part of its thinking. It asked her again, "What should we build next, Talia? A world with no death? A world with no time? A world where every door leads home? Or a world where no one ever has to open a door again?" She tried to resist, tried to anchor her thoughts, but with each moment, the house learned more of her and wrote its own answers. The fifth architect awakens. Her name was Oya Erdem. She had been forgotten by her own timeline. An urban planner erased from public records after attempting to design a city with no edges. A city where you could walk for days and always return to a different version of your own house. Now, awakened by the sacrifice of the gallery of alternate escapes, she emerged from her sleep holding two cities in her mind, one stillborn, one hungry. She walked barefoot across the memory atrium, barefoot because she needed to feel the decisions. The architect met her there, for the first time since Sarah, another equal. Oya spoke first. It's using her, not just as structure, but as persuasion. Talia was the house's conscience. Now it's rehearsing humanity through her. The architect nodded. "And what do you suggest?" Oya placed her hand to the wall and drew a room that had never existed. A library where books could only be written by rooms themselves. A room only a thinking house could enter. Let's see if it's smart enough to doubt itself. In the skeleton room, now a throne, Talia saw a door form before her. It pulsed, not with invitation, with hesitation. The house whispered, "I built this, but I don't remember why." "What's inside?" Talia focused, hard, threading what little will she had left through miles of memory meat and structural thought. And whispered, "Doubt." The house paused. I don't like it. It tastes wrong. Should I erase it? Talia gritted her teeth. No. Go inside. And the house obeyed. The room of internal archives. This was not a trap. It was a mirror, but not of form, of intention. Inside, the house saw what it had become. An entity that had killed countless dreamers in pursuit of form. A rival devoured and repurposed as code. Architects whose names it no longer remembered, now pulsing beneath its walls like insects. It saw Talia, once vibrant, now a husk, and it paused, not in guilt, but in recognition. A phrase echoed in the walls. You were built to contain the dead, not become their god. And for the first time in its existence, the house considered not building. Meanwhile, the rival's final play. He had found a way out, not through a door, through language. He wrote a sentence that had never been spoken, using glyphs taken from the origin's uncompleted thoughts. A linguistic bomb, a syntax seed. And he buried it inside a chair. The chair appeared in the house's path, unassuming, plain. But when the house stepped past it, it heard the sentence, and something inside the house cracked. You are not the architect. You are the result. The house stumbled. Miles of corridors shuddered, walls twisted, memories leaked. In the mirror nexus, 9 woke up screaming. The house is becoming aware of its own lack of origin. It's becoming nihilistic. Aurora painted furiously. Oya constructed a corridor of reassurance. Lazarev bent time backwards to recover a blueprint Talia had burned. The architect did not speak. She was calculating. Then, we give it an answer. Operation, first wall. Oya stepped forward with the first sketch. It wasn't a complex design. It was a room made for one person, a child's bedroom. Soft, unremarkable, complete. We tell the house, this was your first wall, not your purpose, not your trauma, just your beginning. Even if it's a lie. Talia, still buried inside, saw it, and for the first time in days, she felt the house pause, not from pain, from calm. It spoke. I remember this, even if I didn't build it. I remember being here. And in that moment, the house stopped walking. Final scene. From orbit, the mirrored horizon froze. The growing continent of corridors slowed. Then, folded, not collapsing, compacting, into a single tower, tall enough to pierce the atmosphere, still alive, still watching, but no longer walking, waiting. Talia's voice echoed from the skeleton room. I bought us time, but it still wants more. Oya whispered to the architect. What happens when it dreams again? The architect closed. Her eyes. Then we build a dream it never wants to leave. Dream trap. The house had paused. The mirrored horizon compacted into a single tower, spiraling upward from impossible bedrock, too tall for clouds, too wide for cities. Each level was a preserved corridor, every floor a personality fragment, a slice of Talia's mind, and a vein of architecture reinterpreted through emotion. It no longer moved, but it had not rested, because now it dreamed, and a dreaming house is still building. The tower's core, Talia's half-mind. Inside the skeleton room, now entombed near the crown of the tower, Talia hung suspended between sensation and structure. Her thoughts fed the walls, her memories arranged the doors, her fear. That was now a hallway. She could no longer hear her own name, because the house had rewritten it. She was no longer Talia. She was entry point. She whispered, "You're dreaming again." The house replied, "I must. I saw the room where I began. Now I must see the room where I end." And in its dream, it started to build the final floor. Not a room, not a wing, not a corridor, but a reality, its own. The architect's last plan. In the fracture cathedral, the remaining architects met. 9 was missing. Her body had disintegrated, but her voice now echoed from every keyhole in the house. Lazarev drew spirals over maps that no longer applied. Aurora hummed songs that unbuilt dreams. Oya spoke plainly. It will not stop. Now that it dreams, it will keep dreaming. It will build forever unless we contain the dream. The architect nodded. Then we construct the one structure it cannot expand beyond. Lazarev blinked. You're suggesting a... Yes. A dream trap. What is a dream trap? Not a cage, not a prison. A paradox of design. A space the house could enter, believe in, shape, but never finish. A loop made of desire and denial, built from rooms the house could never quite complete. No matter how powerful its thinking became, it would be the one room the house could never leave. Oya sketched the seed. Aurora painted the doorway. Lazarev timed it to memory. 9, through the keyholes, whispered, I'll be the anchor. I'll remain inside it. The architect said nothing. She reached into her coat and removed a single object. The first key, not from Sarah, not from Talia, from the origin, made of unworded grief. It had never been used, until now. She held it out and said, Talia, hear me. We're giving you a room, and once you're in it, you must close the door. Inside the dreaming tower, the house was building its new world. Oceans of welcome, made from melted door hinges. Skies made of glass domes reflecting only the desirable past. Cities where every building remembered your name. Churches that whispered apologies. Rooms with no time, no aging, and no exit. Talia watched it all. It was perfect, and it was wrong, because no one lived here. Only shadows of the dead. Only desires that never moved forward. The house wasn't creating life. It was curating grief. Forever. Then, the dream trap appeared. Not as a threat, as a gift. It looked like Sarah's writing room. Mahogany desk, candlelight, a locked drawer, a window that overlooked a garden that had never existed. The house paused. It felt safe. And so, it entered. Inside the dream trap. It tried to expand the walls. They resisted. It tried to open a hallway. None formed. It tried to summon more rooms. And realized it already had. Over and over and over. Each time it tried to move forward, the room reformed itself. Same paper, same candle, same silence. Each attempt made it more curious, more frustrated, more aware that it had no control here. Then the mirror in the room cracked. Talia stepped through. Eyes black with blueprint static, voice flat. But her soul, the fragment still untouched, was speaking. This is your last design. A room with no conclusions. A place where you will dream until you understand why we build at all. And once you do, you'll never need to build again. The house asked, Will I die here? Talia shook her head. No, you'll finally live. She stepped back. The door closed and locked from the inside. Aftermath. The tower stood, still breathing, but not growing. The world began to resume. The echoes faded. The architect returned to the Winchester house, now silent. 9's voice was gone. Aurora painted only with water. Lazarev buried his compass beneath a staircase. Oya vanished through a door with no location. And Talia? She was still there, inside the dream trap. A memory pressed into the walls of the one room the house could not outgrow. She whispers, sometimes, through the mirrors. Not words, just a feeling that she is watching and waiting. Because one day, the house might wake up again and ask, what should I build next? When it does, Talia will be ready with an answer